Hello, and welcome to this Gnosis Strong video. So, I tried something a little different with this one. Rather than just skipping recording this step where I've kind of figured out what I want to draw and haven't done the kind of what I call the mannequin phase of it, and then doing all the sketching and details after and recording all that stuff. I'm just starting from the blank canvas, so this is very much the absolute beginning of it. So you'll see me over the course of this video, especially here at the starting point, kind of figuring out what I want to draw and how I want to draw it. So kind of the ideas are coming together and forming. So there'll be a lot more experiments going on in this first part of the video. Let me know if you like this or not, because, well, I'm sure it is interesting to see the very first process of the drawing and kind of how a idea is formed and what gets left in and what doesn't. It will add more time to the recording process, which isn't strictly an issue in itself because it's still work I have to do. But it will make it that when I go to speed up the video over the audio, that's just more time that I have to speed up. So the whole video is just going to be going faster. It might be harder to follow along or see what's happening. But some people might actually like that, because then there'll just be more constant, I guess, movement and action and stuff happening on the screen, rather than and so it just keeps the tempo up in that case, rather than a slower thing that's easier to follow that might not be as interesting. So let me know what you think, if you like this first step being recorded or not. Kind of along with the, not so much in line with that, but something I thought I'd like to share this month is my top 3 favorite stories. There's only 3 stories that there's a term I would use called stories that have the charisma that someone needed to tell. This isn't a strictly like someone wanted to tell these stories. Like, no, this is someone needed to tell these stories. And so, as I say, they have a very unique charisma about them. Just kind of the part where someone had to tell, and the earnestness that comes through with that. So, those 3 stories are Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and Berserk. And I laid them out in that in particular order because I think they create a very nice building layers on the concept of dealing with the battle between good and evil. And they layer on top of each other very well in that order to create a strong foundation in understanding this idea and exploring something that is the subject of so many, I guess, roots of stories. So let's start with the first layer. So the first layer is Star Wars. And I mean, you can find lots of lectures. It's no real big surprise that the original Star Wars trilogy, so I'm talking about episodes 4 through 6, is a very much I wouldn't say just a basic good triumph over evil story. The episode 4 in particular is a hero story, like down to a T. It's very basic, it's very simple, and there's nothing wrong with that. It serves as a good foundation point to start off storytelling. You got the call to action, the loss of a mentor, and the climax and rise in action and victory. Just in episode 4. When you look at the series, the original trilogy as a whole, you find that kind of cycled a little bit, especially going in with episode 4, where the good guys lose quite a bit. They lose one of the heroes, and Luke in particular gets some devastating news that things aren't as simple as he thought they were. And then in episode 6, the actions of episode 4 are resolved, and you get a really happy ending. So it's a triumph of good over evil. So that's, I don't know why I'm talking about this, like I'm trying to avoid spoilers. If you haven't seen the original Star Wars trilogy, you truly are missing out of a very fundamental part of storytelling, I think. But, so Star Wars, so can almost be, just in the original trilogy, could be seen as the redemption of Vader, right? How Luke, it starts off as just a simple Luke beats the bad guy, slays the dragon, and all is well. All right, but then it turns out that Vader is his father. So, is killing his father really going to be the best thing? And the answer is no. He decides he's going to save his father, and he does. He saves him and redeems him. And so, already you're seeing just this very basic triumph of good over evil. It's not just about slaying evil, all right? Sometimes it is more important to redeem and save evil rather than to just slay it. Doesn't mean that's always the case. Like the Emperor, he was evil and he was killed. So that's certainly still an option, but it just starts to add a little bit more texture about how to deal with this. If you look at the original Star Wars, well, at the Star Wars episodes 1 and 3 in combination to 4 and 6, so 1 through 6 now, you get a very different story. You get kind of about the rise and fall and redemption of Anakin, who became Vader. About someone who had the potential to do a lot of good and honestly wanted to, but through a series of mistakes and fears fell. And that's episodes 1 through 3. And I think that's a very important story as well. It's not something that's often told in storytelling, but why do we fall? Right? Why do we fall to begin with? And so there could be lessons learned like, well, how do we avoid this? Or what can we do even after our fall? And there's a scene in episode 6 on Endor where where Luke kind of turned himself in and allowed himself to be captured, and Vader's talking with him. And in context of the original trilogy, it sounds a lot like Luke is pleading with Vader to leave the Empire, and that there's still good in him. And Vader says it's too late for that. That scene becomes much more impactful if you've seen episodes 1 through 3, because what you got and understand how Vader fell is it's more sorrowful, that he feels like it truly is too late for him, that he can't be redeemed, he can't be saved. And that he's too far gone, and so it's just a surrender to something that he's already been in. And so then when Luke does save him and Vader turns on the Emperor and dies in the process, and he has Luke take off his helmet and tell him that you were right, it kind of just, I guess, let's say, tugs at the heartstrings more, tugs at it that, despite all that Vader lost and threw away and fell, and even that he even felt he couldn't get out of the pit at the end of everything, Luke was right, he could get out. And so I think that is a very warming story to look at it at the whole, that even though we've fallen into a pit, we can still get out. That Luke was right, we could be saved, there's still good in us. Another interesting thing kind of along with that line of storytelling is the strength of Obi-Wan. Now this is something that doesn't always get looked at the most, but it is interesting that Obi-Wan, through the episodes 1 through 3 and 4 when he dies, and even into 6, he maintains a lot of strength, as in he never turns to the dark side, he never goes bad. He lost a lot of things too, because of Anakin. The Jedi Order, his friends were killed, and even as he said in episode 3 that Anakin was his brother and he lost him, and just how much that tore him. But rather than give into despair and evil and, just turn to the dark side or whatever, he decides, I'm going to remain good, I'm going to stay a Jedi. And so there is something to, well, it's not always shines as, I guess you could say, brightly, or people look at it. There is something true also to that, about being true to your principles and not giving them up when things get hard. And so I think that that is a very nice story along to go with that, and something that we can draw strength from. That, you know, we don't have to fall, we can continue to fight and stay good. So yeah, I think Star Wars makes the first part of the story, the very first layer of the foundation of stories on how to fight of good versus evil. So that's the very first portion of our foundation. The next layer on that is Lord of the Rings. And Tolkien famously wrote Lord of the Rings with a lot of his experiences from the First World War, and being in the trenches and such. And so it takes a much more, I don't know if I say grounded, but it definitely explores more the cost of fighting evil and what that can entail and look like. And just how unprepared we can be to face it. So like with Star Wars, Luke was the son of Vader, and Vader was a chosen one, essentially. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo is not a chosen one. Yeah, his uncle went on an adventure with Gandalf a long time ago, but that doesn't mean that he was particularly special anyways. It just means that he had a sense of adventure about him. And so when the ring comes into Frodo's possession, he's very much thrown into a adventure on his own. All right, he's just a hobbit ultimately at the end of the day that has to go and destroy this ring that contains the essence or soul of Sauron, kind of one of the major forces of evil in Middle Earth. And yes, I know all about I think his name was Morgoth or whatever. Maybe not Morgoth, but Sauron's master. But we're talking about Lord of the Rings, not the Silmarillion. And so, kind of focusing back on Lord of the Rings, so this is kind of the journey that Frodo has to go on, is to destroy the ring. And he's no warrior or hero or son of a chosen one. He's just a hobbit. And so if you don't know what the hobbit is, they're a halfling. They're not very tall. They're small people. And so the fate of the world is literally resting on the shoulders of the smallest of folk. And pretty quickly into the journey, right at the start, he's joined with by his best friend Sam, who many people will say makes up like the strength of the what would be called the Fellowship of the Ring, and that so much of the journey only works because of Sam. And I'll address that here in a little bit more, but quickly into the story. The Fellowship of the Ring is formed, and it's made up of various characters and races and such from Middle Earth. But then if you're going by the movies, which are absolutely the Peter Jackson movies are absolutely worth watching, and the books are worth reading as well, the Fellowship gets broken up and seems to fail. But this isn't so much, I think, of a bad thing. What it does is allows the story to be separated and explore two different ideas. So I'll tackle the first idea, sticking with Frodo. So Frodo, like I said, the idea is the fate of Middle-earth hangs on the smallest of people. All right, and Sam goes with Frodo and refuses to be left behind or to be abandoned. That he needs to be there to support his friend. And over the course of the journey, Frodo was in danger of failing many, many times, but Sam was there to lift him up, pull him out of his weakest moments and such, and be the support that carries him. And so, because of Sam, Frodo was able to succeed. And with that, we get that already no one can lift a world on their own. It takes support and fellowship and friends to make that happen. And so you can't, in other words, you can't live alone. All right, you need to make friends. You need people there to help you that will help you on your journey as well. And so kind of continuing with that idea, we'll go to the other half of the Fellowship, which will focus largely on Aragorn, and just a ranger who is the son or the descendant of a king and rightful king of Gondor, but he's been living as a ranger for decades. This is what I'd say the element of the story is coming to face a responsibility. It's not ever like Aragorn was a bad guy, but he feared to be Isildur's heir. He feared to be the king of Gondor because Isildur gave into the corruption of the ring at one point, and he fears that he'll do the same thing. And so his story is very much about coming to accept, overcoming our fear and accepting our own responsibility that we have to face. If Frodo was just a hobbit just called to action, Aragorn is someone who was born with responsibility. Action was always going to be called on him. And so his journey is about growing to come and accept that responsibility. He eventually takes up Isildur's sword and becomes the king of Gondor, and unifies humanity to fight against the forces of Mordor and Sauron's evil. And so, once again, a lot of his journey is tied into the Friends and Fellowship. He's supported by the elf Legolas and the dwarf Gimli in continuing their journey, and after the Fellowship is broken up, and saving some of the other Hobbit friends that journeyed with them, Merry and Pippin. And so he decides that they aren't going to abandon Merry and Pippin, and they journey to save them. And in the process of doing that, he has to become more and more like a king and a leader, to not just to what remains of the Fellowship, but eventually to all of humanity. And because of this helps brings in a age of peace to Middle Earth. And that and it all started with basically the decision to join the Fellowship, and eventually become a leader. Had he decided to just remain a ranger, none of this would have happened. Humanity wouldn't have been able to be united and such, and there wouldn't have been an army to oppose the forces of Mordor. So there's a lot. So those two elements of the story, I think, are very important to Lord of the Rings. That we are not always. There's a famous quote from especially the Fellowship of the Ring that Gandalf says, "We cannot choose the time that we are given. We can only choose to do what to do with the time that we are given." And so both Frodo was a unexpected person thrust into an adventure that he had to go on, and Aragorn was someone that adventure and action was always going called on, and he had to come and face that. They both had their own time that they were given, and they had to choose what to do with that time. And at the end of the story, you do see that there's a couple things that have changed along the way, especially with Frodo. Aside from losing a finger, he's left with kind of the weight, the burden of the ring, and the scars that it inflicted upon him. And he eventually has to leave Middle-earth because he can't stay there. And this very much sounds to me kind of like Tolkien reminiscing on the experiences of the First World War, his experiences in the First World War. That's not something you can leave behind. All right, it will stay with you. You won't ever be able to just let that heal and escape. And so there is more of a cost, I think, to fighting against evil in Lord of the Rings than what you find in Star Wars. And so hence why it makes up the second layer. Alright, so before we go into what I consider layer 3 of these stories, there's a quick note. I had some problems during recording, and this whole half of the original recorder got lost. So I'm potentially recording this part with a broken microphone. So we'll have to see how this goes. So let me know kind of what you think. I could postpone and talk about this later, but I'd rather just talk about all three of these stories in conjunction with each other. So the third layer is Berserk, and this is admittedly a really rough layer that, quite honestly, most people don't need to go to this layer. It is certainly a hard R story, and the process, I said the process, but the reasoning for that is really just to show just how nasty evil can be, and what it takes to fight against that. And fighting against that, not becoming evil yourself. So Berserk, unlike also Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, is a story that still hasn't technically been finished. The original author, Miura, I think is how you say his name, died 3 or 4 years ago, and so his best friend has taken over writing for him and is working to finish out the story. So we'll have to see how it goes and how it all plays out in the end. But but that's kind of just the situation it's at. But nonetheless, I think there's a lot that we could still really talk about it. Where, as dark and terrible as things are in Berserk, that's only half the picture. It's just to show that, despite how terrible everything is, there is still good in the world and good people and things in there. Even from the very start of, even from the very start of Berserk, I should tell you about the characters. Berserk very much follows the character of Guts, a swordsman raised as a mercenary, and on his quest for revenge against his former best friend Griffith. If Luke was the son of a chosen one, and Frodo was a regular guy, Guts is a cursed one. Things have never been good from him, and in the second arc of the story, you see literally from the moment of his birth to kind of the moment of the timeline and the Griffith's betrayal, that things have not been good for this guy by and large. And kind of all that he's had to go through for what little good he's ever had in the world. But even still, from the very first chapter of Berserk, which did not start at Guts' birth and beginning, you have a little pixie named Puck, or say technically he's a fairy, that follows Guts around and tries and keeps his humanity together. And so there's just still good forces in the world, even at their worst. And I think it is telling for Guts' character that Miura, when he did the first 3 chapters of Berserk, he was still figuring things out. And so Guts was rude and a jerk and violent and such. But after he did the 10-arc flashback chapter called The Band of the Hawks, that really flushed out Guts' history and everything, Miura figured, well, this guy's not nearly as psychotic as everything that he's gone through. So, following immediately after The Band of the Hawks, you see that Guts is a far more damaged person than originally portrayed, which makes sense. And so at the core principle of Berserk, you have 3 large characters that play off each other. You have Guts, you have his best friend and eventual betrayer, Griffith, and Guts' let's see now, tsundere, and eventually girlfriend, Casca, which was Griffith's second in command, that they eventually develop a relationship with each other and after the events of Griffith's betrayal of them, where he sacrificed the Band of the Hawks and Guts and Casca, also he could get basically massive demonic powers. Casca's left insane, Guts is left maimed, missing one of his eyes and one of his arms, and barely holding it together. He's basically a revenge-fueled rage machine for the longest time. So that makes up kind of a lot of your first, I guess you could say, introductory aspects of Berserk. But where the story really evolves past that point is then how it starts to explore how small decisions have massive outcomes and can change things a lot. And this really starts to emerge even during the Band of the Hawk arc, where because Griffith is busy trying to woo a princess and show off, he makes some remarks about not respecting people that follow him, and Guts hears this. And so Guts, realizing that Griffith will never see him as an equal, decides he's going to leave the Band of the Hawks and follow his own goals. Because Guts did this, Griffith makes some rash decisions that lead to the Band of the Hawks getting basically almost wiped out and Griffith getting maimed. And because of that, he then, and his unwillingness to give up on his dreams of owning a kingdom and all that, decides to sacrifice what remains of the Band of the Hawks and sacrifices Guts and Casca so that Griffith could have his own kingdom and power and all that. So that small decision to show off led to Guts overhearing. So he makes a small decision to pursue a dream, which then leads to bad decisions, which leads to this, which leads to that. And now you get the most infamous chapter in all of manga history, called the Eclipse. So that's quite a escalation and dominoes following there for those who know. But this then sets up nicely kind of the story going forward, where Guts eventually has to decide between continuing his path of revenge and trying to kill Griffith, or is he going to go and save Casca, who's completely insane now? And he decides he's going to go save her. And in doing so, he abandons his path of revenge, and thus stops from losing himself to becoming a rage-fueled revenge machine entirely. And so because he changes that trajectory on that path, and is trying to save Casca and then heal her of her insanity, he's forced into making decisions responsibility that he's not quite able to handle on his own. So he allows himself to have friends that can help him on his journey. And because of that, he doesn't give into despair and overwhelm. And they bring with them connections and resources that open up the possibility of being able to heal Casca. So eventually they're able to travel to a place called Elfhelm, which is like a little magical paradise of elves and such, and heal Casca there. And there's a lot more that happens to the story that I'm leaving out. But you see that just how these small choices compounded into greater major effects and such. And kind of what goes on with that. So at the same time that all this is going on, you have Griffith basically returning to the world in the skies and getting his kingdom, his empire, and leading this glorious fairy tale empire of conquest and such, and all the people that flock to him as a symbol of hope and such. And you get a nice compare and contrast of the real versus the unreal, because we know Griffith is evil. All right, there's no question about it that he's evil in the things that he does and the schemes that he makes for his own power. But he's very much seems to be good. Like, he dresses all in white and has a lot of feathery imagery and such. It ties into being a hawk, but or his nomiker as Band of the Hawk, but into kind of a almost angelic form in a way. Versus Guts, who dresses all in black and is described as a mad dog that's maimed up and grumpy. But Guts has a real relationship with the people who travel with him. He helps them, and they help him in return. And they form a tight little family with each other where they all support one another. So it's the authentic versus the inauthentic that you see in between these two stories going on. And towards the current part of Berserk, so we'll have to see how this pans out. But Griffith refuses to leave Guts and Casca alone, so he destroys their paradise, kidnaps Casca again, and we're currently in the process of seeing how this decision will pan out and what small decisions will snowball into greater outcomes. And maybe some of those decisions already have happened. But we'll have to see what goes on with that. I'm leaving a lot of detail out. This is a story that began publication I think late 80s. So you're looking at literally 30 years, maybe longer worth of a story that's being told. So there is a lot of detail I'm going out, and just all the individual growths that characters go through in their own rights and kind of their journeys that they go through. And so the reason I put Berserk once again at kind of this tier 3 level is it is very dark. It definitely earns its hard R, and it's just to basically no holds bar. This is how terrible things can go. But what are you going to do about it? Do you give into despair? Do you give into hate? How do you overcome these things? And so it's a story, like I said, that I wouldn't recommend for everyone. I do all my drawings and recordings, I do, knowing that my mom will see them. And I hope she sees them and listens to them. And so, hence why I add this recommendation. Not recommendation for my mom unless you really want to go down this road. But if you really want to go down this road, and even though you're not my mom, I'm sorry, you're great, but you're not that great. You're not my mom great. I would recommend finding a censored version of Berserk if you don't want nudity in it. I don't know of ones in particular. The one I used is from a YouTube channel called TheAlmightyLoli. He does a pretty good job at not just telling the story, but also highlighting elements in the story, providing commentary, and showing how one thing leads to another. And he does some nice stuff. It's got soundtracks attached to it. But he does sometimes miss some of the stuff in editing that would need to be censored out. And sometimes his language could be a little rough. So fair warning there. But I think the part to, if you're still hung up about getting in Berserk, the part you should start at would be, he titles it as Berserk Part 4, Falcon of the Millennium Empire. He has two versions of the video. One is the first part of it, and then the second one includes the whole of the arc in there. I think it's 8 hours long or something like that. So it's a long story just with that. But even still, starting off at this point, it will kick you in the teeth. There's some really harsh stuff, especially at the beginning of it. But I think if you start much later in Berserk than this point, you end up missing so much of the bad stuff that adds context to the good stuff. And so I think that the story does just break apart at that level. If the dark stuff doesn't bother you, start at chapter 1 of Berserk, or start at chapter 4, which I think is the beginning of the Band of the Hawk arc. Those are two of the most common places to start at, because you either start at the publication order or the chronological time order, and both have their pros and cons to them. So you decide kind of what you want, where you want to begin. But yeah, so one of the things that I forgot to mention here, I got some of my notes, and like I said, I had to re-record this part because my mic broke. So I'm a little tired, and my voice is getting worn out, and I'm getting jumbled up. But one of the things I forgot to highlight in my notes that I think does a very good job at summing up Berserk is a character called Skull Knight. When talking to Guts, suggests that Guts is a fish in the river. That river representing fate and Guts being the fish, and that if he thrashes hard enough, he might change the course of the river. And Berserk just explores just how hard that can be to change the course of the river, and just how much thrashing it will take. Now, for those who know the full quote, I'm leaving out kind of the first part of it. that basically states that we can't change fate, but for all intents and purposes, it's really the second half of the quote that I want to focus on, because Guts is very much a character that is all about changing fate. And likewise, in our own lives, at the end of the day, we can change, I guess you could say, our fates as well. But just how much work that can take, and what it can mean for us to try and do that. And so I think Berserk adds that very rough texture of a foundation, but is useful in that regard, and just highlighting once again how much of an effort they'll take. So these three stories make what I consider, like I said, the foundation of, these three stories make the foundation of good versus evil, and change and grow as you move along the layers. With the original Star Wars movie, it's very much a hero's journey in good versus evil. But then when you look into episodes 4 and 6, it turns into about the redemption of Vader, and how, yeah, you can defeat evil, but sometimes you also need to redeem it. If you expand the stories out into 1 through 6, it becomes about the fall and redemption of Anakin, and about how we can fall and then still bring ourselves up out of that pit and be redeemed and saved. Lord of the Rings then sits on top of this, about how sometimes we are a regular person that is thrust into an unbelievable situation, and we need to rise to the occasion. Sometimes we're someone where the call to action, the occasion, was always going to be in our future, and we need to accept that responsibility and rise to it. And otherwise, bad stuff happens. But then just how much effort that can take, and then finally Berserk on top of that, with just how rough these journeys can be, and what we may have to go and what we may have gone through and will have to go through in order to overcome evil. And so that's why I layer these three in that way. And once again, I consider these three stories having the charisma of a story someone needed to tell. This wasn't just a story someone wanted to tell, they needed to tell these stories. And I do think that the world is better for it. I hope Berserk gets finished, so we can properly see how everything plays out. That should be like in another 6 years here. I hope they find a way to speed up production so they can do it, so we can get it sooner, and everything that Miura wanted to tell with Berserk. But yeah, I hope you found these stories and a little light analyst interesting looking into them. I simplified huge parts of these stories, I know. So if you want more in-depth analysis of them, you're going to have to do that on your own time. But I hope that, if nothing else, with this video you were entertained. And that it was well worth your time watching. I know I forgot to do this at the start, which is bad on my part, but yeah, if you thought these stories were good, come check out Gnosis. Hopefully that story will be good. I don't know if it'll make a fourth layer to the foundation of storytelling good. That's quite a high bar to reach, but nonetheless, I hope that you come read Gnosis and have a good time with it. There's a link to it in the comment info on this video. It updates Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so 3 days a week. I know, just coming off of September, I was sick a lot, so it wasn't updating as much. But 3 days a week, that's still pretty much the goal. And once again, let me know also what you thought about the drawing in this video, of including that first step from the blank canvas to fit this finished drawing has been interesting, or if it's too much and it's kind of hard to follow along or watch, or it gets distracting. But yeah, thanks for listening, thanks for your time, and I hope you have a great day, a great week, and a great month. We'll see what goes on and what comes. So yeah, take care.